Hey guys! Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. And if you didn't watch the last roundup that we did for air coolers, then the beginning won't make much sense. It doesn't really make much sense to me anyway. But anyway, yes, it's not normal anyway, whatever. So recently, Kaby launch, massive. I put so much work into that. Literally, I had 2 days off over Christmas and New Year to make sure I could get all the boards done. We did the 2 CPUs, which you can go and find on the channel, the i5 and the i7, so the 7700K and the 7600K. Overclocked to 5 gigahertz and beyond, and also checking out volts and massive memory, like we got some memory running at 4000 megahertz. And then boards, we did the Strix E, the Strix F, we did the ROG code, the ROG formula, we did the Gigabyte Gaming 7, and we did the MSI Pro Gaming Carbon, or whatever they've called their gaming carbon boards. And then on my other channel, which is RushKit, what's RushKit, what you on about? RushKit is my like preview channel and my quick guides and, you know, quick little things, look at the rigs that we use type of stuff. Anyway, RushKit, we did loads of other motherboards. So we did the Strix G, which is basically the old M80X Gene. We did an ITX MSI board. We did some other like Asus boards like the Tough, which is basically the Sabertooth. So there was loads of stuff on there as well, loads and loads of work. But what also went live on the website was this, which was we basically took a 7700K, overclocked it to 5 gigahertz, well 4.8 and 5 gigahertz, and then we run it on loads of air coolers. But when we run it on loads of air coolers, what we also did is we did sound tests, and we also swapped the fans out for some EK Vardis. Yeah, so lots and lots of testing, lots and lots of information. I'll cut back in with the other stuff in a bit. So we, as you can see behind me, we've got some Corsair coolers. We've even got some of the Acastus Venom coolers here, and Be Quiet cooler as well. They come from overclockers. We've got cryo-rig stuff, because cryo-rig did really well in the air cooling test. We did that. There's some Silverstone stuff around the back. The desk just isn't big enough. Cooler Master coolers, we've done the Sidon, or Sidon, however you want to pronounce it. And then also their Master Liquid stuff. We did some stuff from Alpha Cool as well. So there's a big range here. Now people are going to say straight away, where is the X60, X62, X52 and X42? Well, we've been trying, this has been kind of like building up for a while, and we did say to NZXT about it, and they just didn't send us any in time. I've stressed at them that I would like to do it again. Well, not do all of this again, but I would like to do their coolers. It's down to them. It seems to be like a lot harder work than it should be, but we'll see. It may change, I don't know. I asked, they didn't send, that's why they're not in here. So don't go thinking I've omitted anyone. If people are going to start shouting about any other brands, then we sent an email out to most people. These are the ones that replied. And as you can see, there's enough here to have kept us busy over the crazy Christmas period anyway. So a quick blast about the actual rig itself. Now, with this CPU situation and the very, very limited timescales that we had over the Christmas New Year break, what we ended up doing is we did have a lot of motherboards here, but we also, just because we have a lot, they don't all stay, despite what people might think. And we didn't know what was going to stay and what the state of play with samples was going to be in the new year. So what we ended up doing, because you can do, is we updated the BIOS on our Ranger, which is the Maximus 8 Ranger. And there doesn't look like there's going to be a Maximus 9 Ranger, but anyway. So we updated the BIOS in this, and we chucked a 7700K in this for testing. Overclocked it to 5 gigahertz, but we also did a 4.8 gigahertz run. Because if you follow my CPU review, what you'll see is the voltages, yes, you can get sort of 5 gigahertz from somewhere between 1.3 and 1.35 volts. We did testing at 1.3 volts for 5 gigahertz with this rig. But if a lot of the manual volts, when you just leave it and you leave it on auto, it kind of kicks around 1.25. But if you go in there and manually set that and some other volts, you can actually get it to manually set from what should be 4.5 gigahertz at stock volts. You can actually, with our one at least, and with some of the ones that we've seen other people testing, 4.8 seems kind of a decent standard for 1.25 volts as well. For the, you know, the majority of them. Obviously, you're going to get some that are better. Obviously, you're going to get some that are worse, and that's why you always need to follow the rules of the Silicon Lottery and overclock your own processor and not copy our settings. But, so we did 2 runs. We did one at 4.8 gigahertz, 1.25 volts, which we'll call stock volts. And then we did another run with 5 gigahertz, and this is the i7 7700K, 1.3 volts. And that did help us kind of minimize down the pack. But I did say to you, we did do some VADA testing as well. We did do some noise testing as well, but we'll talk about that when we get into it. So the 4.8 gigahertz run, I will break the graph down into chunks so that it will come up on the screen in different bits and you can have a look. And then what you can see is the delta and the average. Now the average temperature, what we do is we take all of the cores, add them all up, divide them by 4, really simple. To then get the delta temperature, you subtract the ambient temperature of the room. We have a nice climate controlled room thanks to air conditioning and the fact it can heat and it can cool and all of that sort of stuff. So we're always kicking within kind of 0.5 of a degree, we're always kicking around the 20-degree mark. What we also do is we don't test anywhere near the aircon heater, whatever it was, we don't test near that, it's not in direct, of that. And we make sure we give decent kind of warm up and cool down periods as well, because what we'll do is we'll leave it just running at stock for a little bit, because obviously if you put a cold cooler in, it might get a slightly, like a better head start or something like that. So we give it a good chance to kind of bed in and everything as well. It was literally, to test these coolers, it was close to a week's worth of work in total. And you'll see why we had to do it multiple times in a minute. So we've gone through the tests. Now everything passed 4.8 gigahertz, everything. You can see that in the graphs, do you know what I mean? We don't need to go through it. If you're interested, you can pick your cooler out. If you're wondering about air coolers, we couldn't test everything, because otherwise, if we have add an HD15 in, someone's going to ask about cryorig, and then someone's going to ask about 212. We may revisit the air coolers later, but for now, we've concentrated on this because, as you will see, when you do kick it up to 5 gigahertz, the graph gets a lot smaller. Now, 1.3 volts, it was quite warm. Now, there is a lot of talk about delidding. There is also something that seems to be filtering through at the moment. We're not sure how it's going to pan out, but it may be BIOS at launch as well, because we did see a BIOS change which seemed to reduce temperatures on the actual motherboard testing. It's something that we are going to cover later, but for now, with the stuff that's out and about for the public at this present moment in time, within the first week, these results are 100% comparable with what you guys can be using and the BIOSes that are available. Anyway, so 5 gigahertz. We can whiz through, and you've got the, okay, so we've got all the boxes out, and this is basically just to give me a visual guide to be able to whiz you through so that I can show you some of the pictures of the coolers that did make the 5 gigahertz side of things. So we have got the Silverstone Tundra, and it's the TDO2E. Fatter radiator. It's actually a little bit nicer looking as well. Came in at a fairly decent price too. Then you've also got the cryorig, pretty much made it with all of them. So you ended up with the A40 and the A40 Ultimate. Basically the difference between those is one has a 27.5mm radiator and one has a 38.5mm radiator. They're both 120mm fans, so 240mm rads. You then go up to the A80, which is their 280mm offering. And that is back down to a normal 27.5mm rad. You also get the Cooler Master Liquid Pro 240. Again, 240mm radiator. It kind of lights up on the top of the block as well. The fact that the in and the out for the cooling is on either side of the radiators doesn't necessarily always help the actual kind of look when it's in a rig. But, you know, kind of, it's subjective. There will be another one coming out later on without the light on the top, and it's got the in and the out on the same side, which will help for keeping the hoses looking nice. And then you have the Corsair stuff, and they've all made it into this. So we've got the H115, which is their 280mm radiator. These are all of the Acetec based units, as you can tell, because the hose comes right out the very top of the CPU block and not out of the side, and is adjustable. So 280mm, 2 times 140mm fans. Then you go up to the H100i V2. They don't call it GTX now because Nvidia got offended. So we've got 220mm fans on this. Again, same as the H115 and the H80, braided hoses, RGB underneath the silver bit on the block that you can manually set to whatever you want. They've all got link as well. And then down to the H80, it's a slightly thicker radiator, 38mm radiator, but it's a single 120mm fan, but they do send it with 2, so you can put one either side, so it's kind of push-pull. So 120mm rad, 240mm rad, and 280mm rad. Now, when we go into the graph, what you can see, to kind of follow on from the big graph that we did before, we did test them. Like, for argument's sake, the Corsair stuff, we tested them in quiet, balanced, and high if there was options in the software available. Some of them didn't come with software options or anything like that. So with these, if they didn't come with software and they just come, we just run them at 12 volts so you get the best performance. Because if we start adding like 7-volt reducers in and stuff like that, it's a bit complicated, because to be honest with you, you're not going to use those and you're going to end up using your motherboard software. So if you see them, what you can do, and they're just at 12 volts, you can think to yourself, well, I'm obviously not going to want to run it at that, and I'll end up stepping it down. But hold tight, because there will be tests later with Vardas where we've done those at 12 and 7 volts. And also the good thing about the Vardas is it levels out the playing field, because we take away the fans from all of the AIOs and we put aftermarket ones in, so it's the same fans across. So then what that does is it separates them out, and it then means there's a level playing field, because they're all being run at the same speeds. And then it comes down to the pump technology, the cold plate technology, and the radiator technology. So as we can see with this, the CryoRig A80, which was the big one at the bottom, 280mm, did really well. Again, don't forget that would have been on 100% fans. But amazingly, the A40 Ultimate, which is the 240mm rad, but the slightly thicker radiator, that did very well as well. And then in third place, really what we came down to was the Corsair H115i. This was with it in high mode. Now with high mode, it can eventually go up to full speed, but with the temperatures that we were getting, which you can see here, the average was 75.5, it never would have really been going absolute full tilt. You would have had to have manually set it to full tilt for it to have got there. So if we'd have gone and done it, you know, that kind of way, it could have been different. But again, wait for the Vardas, because obviously the Vardas, we will do 12 volt testing. To be honest with you, if we would have just done it evenly again, then we would have just done them all on 12 volts. But if we'd done them all on 12 volts, then people always moan about like the noise and stuff. So it's very subjective. We'd end up having to test one cooler for an entire day to be able to please everyone. And when we go down here, the one kind of that's to be surprised about out of all of these is the Corsair H80, which is the only 120mm cooler that made the 5 GHz pack. It was on high, so both those fans were going almost full tilt. Do you know what I mean? They were really going for it. But it did manage to keep the average temperature below that 80-degree threshold, which we kind of favour for these testing. We do it with OCCT. And with OCCT, essentially what we do when we run it, we've got an 80-degree cutoff. And it's never like one core gets to 80. It's normally kind of the average across the 4. Once there's an average across the 4 goes above 80 degrees, that's when it will automatically stop, and it lets us know as well. And by letting the program do it, there's no human error or anything like that. So we just, you know, we let the software kind of guide us through it. Then, this is the one that you're going to want to pay attention to, because this was stock versus Varda fans. Now, what we did with the Vardas is we actually went back down to 4.8 gigahertz. And the reason why we went back down to 4.8 gigahertz is so that all of the coolers were included in the testing. What we did is we then tested the cooler fans, all of them again at 12 volts. So we have a 12 volt test. Then what we do is we put the Vardas in, and we do a 12 volt test as well, and we were wiring that straight up to a CPU, a Molex header, so one of the little 4-pin power jacks from your power supply, with an adapter that came up to a 4-pin header. And then what we did is we run them all at 12 volts through that, and then to keep it fair as well, we then put them all with a 7-volt reducer in, so like a resistor, basically a resistor wire in, to take it down to 7 volts, and we tested them all again. So every one of them got their stock fans tested at 12 volts, every one of them got a VARDA tested at 12 volts, and every one of them got a VARDA tested at 7 volts. And you'll be saying to me, oh yeah, but Tom, there's different sizes. Yes, we did do 120mm and we did do 140mm as well. So we did a fair bit of testing for this bit. So with this one, again, the VARDAs, you can see that the A80 here did go right to the top of the graph. A40 Ultimate, then we've got the Corsair H100i V2. The only reason why it says that we've got high in the graph is that's because we did just go into the software and make sure that it was all set to high, so that the pump was on full speed as well. Because with all the other ones, they were running on 12 volts anyway, but we did it with the Corsair stuff through the software. Obviously, you can turn the pump noise down. If you pump down a little bit, it will make a little bit less noise, but this was just to keep everything fair. So yes, we then the Alpha Isobear did fairly well. The Tundra TDO3E did quite well as well. And then when we move down a little bit, we've got kind of the Be Quiet midships. But again, if you wait later on, you'll be able to see the noise tests. And then down the bottom, you've got the other Silverstones and the 120 Cooler Master and the 240 down there as well. So we did all of that testing, lots of graphs, lots of, too much for me to put into a video to be able to show you between. But then what we did is we got the our noise tester out. Now what we did with the noise tester is, because it's very subjective, we haven't got a totally silent room that we can test in. We don't have, there's no way that you can really replicate a manufacturer's kind of noise tests unless you're using their exact kit. So what we've done is we've done our testing. Now you can only really compare our testing to our testing. You can't go and say another website said this or that page says that. You can only really compare what's in this graph to make it fair. So we've got a sound meter. We turned all of the other fans off in the case. And then what we did was we put our sound meter at the front. Now, if you put the sound, a lot of people will say, but that's not where your ear is. But the thing is, if you put the sound meter where your ear is, you don't really hear, the sound meter doesn't really pick up a great deal of it at all. So we did it inside the case so that there is a very distinguishable difference between the coolers. So if in the case it's the worst case scenario, it's not the fact that we're registering 50 to kind of 70 decibels, which is obviously quite loud. It's just the fact that we need numbers for a graph. And if we test them all the same, then they are relative. So for argument's sake, your ear will still hear the 50 decibel difference from the Acastus Venom A10 to the Corsair one at 69 degrees. 69 degrees, 69 decibels. There is a noticeable difference between them all. Now, the thing is what we did do is we tested them all at 12 volts for this. So it is a worst case scenario as well. So the Acastus stuff, the A10 is ridiculously quiet. And I'll show you. Because it is a single fan cooler. It's just 120 mil. So you only had one fan going there. But then when you go up to the A20, it does add another, say for argument's sake, 8 decibels of noise in because there's a second fan running. So, that's the difference. But they were ridic quiet. They were very, very quiet. Because they were quiet, is because the fan speeds don't kind of ramp up as much, and that's why the cooling performance is slightly down as well. So one of the things that we can say is, yes, they're quiet, but that may suit a lot of people, but it does mean that you're not going to get that absolute rip edge of performance The other one really to kind of compare with is the Be Quiet Silent Loop 240, which is a couple of notches below. Now, Be Quiet are obviously famed for being quiet, but when you put 240mm versus 240mm at 12 volts, the Be Quiet one was louder. So, you know, you kind of, a lot of people always kind of moaned at us before about the Be Quiet stuff being about silence. Now, it did do well, but, you know, noise-wise, the Acastus stuff was better. And you can go back and cross-check the graphs that we said to you about before, so you can see where they are. You know, they were different. For argument's sake, if we go back to the Vardas, the Acastus 20, let me look where to see where the Be Quiet is. Right, so Acastus A20 versus Be Quiet. The Be Quiet performance overall was marginally better than this one. So, you know, this one is quieter, but this one does perform ever so slightly better. Could be down to noise. You never know. At the end of the day, cooling performance and stuff, you're always going to get air noise because you've got air running across the radiators. So, and then noise-wise, the worst one was the Corsair H115i. So even though it did quite well, it wasn't the quietest. So it didn't top the graphs for performance, apart from with noise. So it's a noisy cooler, but doesn't perform as well as the CryoRig, for example. So that, you know, there's some good stuff that we can take from it there. And then just another quick graph that we can pop up for you all as I shuffle through my pads. Aha, there we go. Right, so the other graph that we can pop up for you now is the CPU heatsink at 5 gigahertz versus the price. So what we've done there is we've put their average temperatures in the graphs, and then we've also put the prices in the graphs as well. So for argument's sake, you can see there that the Silverstone Tundra really for 80 quid is quite a bargain because it does really well. Anything above it costs at least 30 quid more. And you don't get a massive difference in price. And even the Alphacore Isobear, that's a little bit below it, do you know what I mean? That's another 15 quid above. So I think that graph's quite a cool one when you can actually balance out the price versus the actual performance. So when we go on to awards, we did give a few of them awards based on certain things. And what we did do is we gave the CryoRig A80, the A40 Ultimate, and the Corsair H80i V2. We gave those all the performance award because they all did really well as an all-rounder. The Corsair is, you know, louder because they do have to ramp those fans up to be able to keep the cooling on board. But if you've got limited space and maybe you play with cans and stuff, it might not necessarily be a bad thing. It's definitely got a lot of grunt for the size of it, let's put it that way. The CryoRig stuff did do really well performance-wise. It did do quite well with the noise testing as well. But the only thing, it's going to be subjective, is they do have the fan that goes on top of the heatsink to cool like the VRMs and stuff. VRMs don't get particularly hot unless you've got a really bad motherboard, or a cheap motherboard, I should say, that's maybe not got a heatsink on the MOSFETs or something like that. And you can take it off, but the problem is when you do take it off, you can tell that something's missing. So for the actual CPU cooler, like the pump top, where it actually goes onto your CPU, I don't like the look of it with the fan on it, and it looks even worse with the fan off of it. So performance was there, it did do really well, it did very well in the graphs, but I think it's kind of let down a little bit by the aesthetics of the pump top. So it's a bit of a trade-off with that one. I can also say that I know on good assurance, because it's been quite hard, especially for people in the UK, to get CryoRig stuff. Well, I do know that overclockers are going to be stocking it. I spoke to, when I did the big roundup before, the air cooling roundup, it was really, really hard to be able to get CryoRig stuff in the UK. And there was another retailer that was doing it, but they were very lackluster about it. They didn't really care. It was just a product that they had in their lineup. So I spoke to CryoRig about it, and they did say that they needed a new disty and stuff. So I spoke to overclockers, and overclockers kind of then hooked back up with CryoRig, and they sorted out all the margins and all that sort of stuff. So overclockers are going to be stocking CryoRig stuff. within weeks, I think stock is en route. So that's going to be a really good thing because the air coolers are epic. These do perform well, but again, I think it's a project for the top. Someone's going to start making like little tops for them to cover it up and making it as another thing that they mod, or at least that would be the way that I would do it to make it look nicer. Value for money, we gave the Silverstone Tundra TO2E. It was mid-place in the graphs, to be fair, but for 80 quid compared to some of them that were there that were like 30 or 40 pounds more and performing around the same, that actually did really well. And it's the only thing that really lets it down, to be honest with you, is like the plain rubber hoses on it. And beyond that point, if they put braided hoses on it, it would be hard not to want to go and buy it. I would probably change the fans on it if it was a project. You know, like when you go in and you put it in your rig and then you start changing all the bits and you're matching all the fans up, I probably would change the fans because I wouldn't want those fans in the rest of my rig. But do you know what I mean? If it's a fit and forget job where you're just looking for performance and you're just looking for some decent cooling for decent money and you're not one of those kind of aesthetic whores like me, it's hard not to recommend. Then exceptional aesthetics, we went for the Cooler Master Liquid Pro 120 and 140. They do look really nice with that little top. It's something different. Some people aren't going to like the corrugated hosing on it, and some people aren't going to like the fact that the hoses come out on different sides. I personally don't like the fact that the hoses are coming out on different sides. But when you looked at all of the coolers, you know, it was one of the prettier ones. But then again, you know, prettiness is subjective, which is why we don't all chase after the same women. Enthusiast grade was the Alpha Cool Eyes of Bear. Now, I've got the Eyes of Bear. Well, it's actually, I've got the Eyes Wolf. Because the Eyes Bear, in my stupidity, has already gone off to one of the forum members that's doing like a project and stuff on the forums. So that's already gone off to him, and I forgot to keep the box. But we've got the Eyes of Wolf here, and it's good that I kept this one because with the Eyes Wolf, it's a GPU block, and you can link it all up into the CPU block. Now, to be honest with you, the hosing on it and stuff is a bit clunky, and it's not the nicest thing in the world. If you're one of these people that you wanted a water-cooled CPU and you wanted a water-cooled GPU and you just want to kind of put it all in there and fit it and forget it, and you don't particularly care about the way it looks, and it does do really well. But as you may have seen in the Fractal build that I did with the Define C, you can use your own hose, take it all apart, you can bleed it all through. It does become almost like you might as well have bought dedicated water cooling gear, but the bit where it does kind of claw a little bit back is the fact that the pumps are in the CPU block and the GPU block. They are ridiculously quiet pumps as well once you've got all the air out of them. They do very well with that. And it does mean that you don't need a dedicated reservoir, a separate pump, which might be loud. So that there are trade-offs with it, as you can go and see with the Fractal build that I did. I'll put the link for that underneath as well. But that's why we gave that the Enthusiast Grade Award, because we can see that for being someone that wants to get a bit more hands-on with it. If you just want to buy the CPU block and fit it and leave it, I would personally say don't bother. The Eyes Bear really does come into its own when you introduce the Eyes Wolf GPU stuff into it as well. So that again, it's a good with one hand, and then but there's kind of some, you know, there's some clauses, there's small print. And then the Silence Award we gave to the Venom A10. And to be honest with you, if you want some okay performance at pretty good money, but you want it to be quiet, and you might not have a lot of room or something like that, this was very, very surprising. It did well in the performance graphs for 4.8 gigahertz, which, let's face it, is still a fairly lumpy clock. It did well with the graphs, but it was just the performance numbers. And you need to remember those performance numbers were with the fans running flat out. So, you know, they don't spin, you know, they're not 3,000 RPM server fans. But it does well. You might not like the yellow, you might love the yellow. That's one for the Bumblebee fans. So, lots of information, lots of stuff, lots of graphs, different fans, fan speed reducers, all kinds of stuff, all tested on the 7700K, and we did 4.8 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So there was a lot of testing going on. Now, going forward, we may end up dropping a Z270 motherboard into the test rig. But to be fair, it's not particularly needed for these needs. It's not a build that we're trying to sell you, because we don't sell rigs. It's just a test rig. So the Z170 is more than ample. We don't need the second M.2 because we don't even use the M.2 on it. And we don't need, you know, all the stuff that the Z270 chipset brings. So this for us is all right. And the only reason why I'm making sure that I cover it is because I know I'm going to get people going, but why aren't you using the latest motherboard, Thomas? Anyway, so yes, would love to know what you thought. Because like I said, there was a lot of effort that went into this to try and get it live for you for the 3rd. We may come back, or you know, there's a possibility that we may come back and retest the air coolers as well. But you know, give us a bit of a breather for a couple of weeks after the madness from Christmas and New Year, and we'll see where we are after that. But for now, at least, with award-winning coolers for different reasons, I liked doing this. It was good. I didn't like the stress because of time, you know. And that's why you're getting the video late as well, because we just run out of time for the 3rd. But anyway, love to know what you think. This has been Tiny Tom Logan doing his thing, talking too much, out.